welcome everybody to the third episode of Fitness Decoded. What are we talking about today, David? We got macronutrients on deck. We're gonna go into a little bit about supplements. What else am I missing here? I know you got some stuff prepared for today.
Nutrient timing and food composition.
That is right.
Those are two other things that we're going to go into a little bit more in depth for. Those are going to have a little bit more of an impact, I would say, especially nutrient timing on those interested in like adjusting their diet for performance. But yeah,
cool. So this is going to be more of a continuation of last episode, kind of touching on the things that we didn't really have time to cover. So we did go a little bit over time last week. So before we get started here, just going to go over a few things. So this, again, like I said, this is going to be a third episode. So we've been doing the bi-weekly schedule, which has been kind of working for both of our schedules here. So yeah, right now we're Wednesdays, 5 p.m. every other week. That's going to be 2 episodes a month. This episode, I'm going to try and work on the audio only. Throw that up on SoundCloud to start. I'm still working on the Spotify deal. I don't really know how that works yet, but I need to look into that. But right now, yeah, I'm hoping to put the audio up on SoundCloud. If that's not going to be later this evening, it'll definitely be tomorrow. You can find the full episode either as a VOD on my channel. That's this channel you're watching on now. Well, actually, I should reiterate, you're probably watching this on YouTube, as I feel most of our viewers are. So if you are watching on Twitch, that's you already know where to find us, because we're here. If you're watching on YouTube, link will be in the description. That's MadisTTV on Twitch, of course. That being said, make sure you follow, subscribe, turn on notifications. I'll let you know when to find us when we put that stuff up. But yeah, YouTube uploads are going to be Wednesday night. If I don't get around to it, definitely Thursday, sometime during the day. Audio only listeners, yeah, we'll try and get that stuff up for you on SoundCloud. I need to make a SoundCloud account for this podcast still, so we got to do that. We've got our socials popping up every few seconds here, so if you want to follow us on our social medias, you can find us there. But yeah, that's about all I have. Oh, another thing, this you might be wondering what this empty little box is in the little right hand corner here. This is the chat box. This is for you guys, and I've been losing my mind because I put so much work into this to make sure it worked, and no one's used it so far. So let me demonstrate. All you gotta do is just go into chat and just type anything, and boom, look at that. How cool is that? It just pops up right in the little chat box that I made. So again, if you guys have any questions, yeah, there you go, David's got the hang of it. So if
anyone's wondering, I got it pulled up over here as well.
Yeah. So if you've got any questions that you want to swing our way during the stream, or anything you want to bring up, feedback is also welcome as well. Throw it in the chat. We will address it. That's the whole idea behind doing this live, is we can interact with our viewers. If you're watching on YouTube or listening to the audio, feel free to comment, compliments, raise any concerns, any suggestions, questions. Yeah, we monitor that stuff quite actively, so we'll be able to get back to you. Or just hit us up in the DMs if you really want specific questions. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about that. I just wanted to get that done out of the way, make sure that I know most of our audience watches like the first little bit and then they tune out. That's another thing I'm going to start doing. So moving forward, we are going to be uploading I'll be chopping up the 2 hour, however long the episode is. Usually it's come to 2 hours so far. I'm going to be chopping them up into little like 10-minute sections on YouTube, with each kind of topic that we talk about, or at least like interesting little tidbits of information that I find people would want to tune in for specifically, because let's be honest, most people don't have the time or the interest to tune into a 2-hour podcast about two guys just talking about fitness related things. Like that's just people these days, myself included, have the attention span of a goldfish. Unless it's something that I'm seriously invested in, I have no desire to spend 2 hours listening to something that is honestly mostly educational. I went to school for that and I hated it. So yeah, we're going to be chopping up little topics, putting it on YouTube in little 10-minute segments, or however long the segment is really. that way it's, more accessible to you guys. You can pick and choose what you want to learn about rather than having to scrub through the whole video that we throw up there. But if you do want to watch the whole thing, it will be up on YouTube. Again, audio only. We're going to try putting that up on Spotify. But yeah, let's get into it. So, David, take it away.
All right, this episode is sponsored by Mammoth Mug. Not really. I'll keep doing it though until we actually do get sponsored by Mammoth Mug or anybody really.
What I need to so I can't remember if I made a Twitter account for the podcast yet. I knew I said I was going to. I think I forgot to do it, but if we do get our Twitter account up and running, then we can just like at them every day, be like, "Hey, Mammoth Mug, sponsor us."
I'll every single time I pop it on my Instagram, I'll just add Mammoth Mug if they have an IG account and just be like, "Listen, I am giving you free sponsorship regardless. Sponsorship right now. This podcast. Everybody, put it in the chat. Sponsor us, please."
Yeah, I mean, I got a bunch of products here with me today that I would be plugging because they're products that I've been using for years. So it's not sponsored, but it's just things that I generally enjoy.
Oh yeah, also for you too. Please don't take her down our video. We're actually not sponsored.
I don't think they can do that. I think if just Mammoth Bug doesn't like us saying that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
fair enough.
I don't know why they wouldn't. I mean, this is a gold mine.
Exactly.
All 30 YouTube viewers will be inclined to buy a Mammoth Mug after this.
100%. All right, let's get into this. Matt, if you want to pop up the little pyramid.
Yes, sir.
On screen.
It's up.
It's up? Okay.
Yeah.
So, last time when we were on our last episode of the podcast, we spoke pretty much exclusively on calories and macros. Calories we dove into very in depth for like about an hour and a half or more of the podcast, and then we spoke briefly on macros. And we didn't really touch on adherence either, but that's like an overall general topic we'll kind of go over as we continue with these nutrition-based episodes. For this episode, I actually quickly want to touch again on macros, simply because we kind of skimmed over recommended amounts, and there's a little bit more detail that I want to go into for our viewers who are perhaps more specifically inclined to care about the information regarding their specific sport. So I'm going to quickly gloss over macro information for specific instances that some people might find very interesting. Okay, so let me pop it open in front of me. All right, so as we discussed before, quickly to gloss over, macronutrients represents about 25% of our total diet priorities. Protein, carbohydrates, and dietary fat are our three main macronutrients, and each of them have distinct properties that need to be balanced in order to have an overall balanced diet, regardless of health and performance. So, I'm going to quickly go over protein in regards to various different athletes, as well as people interested more in like physique sport or general weight gain and weight loss. As we talked about before, protein is composed of various chains of amino acids. These amino acids are basically, the building blocks of musculoskeletal muscle, stuff like that, and other distinct physiological stuff going on in the body. When it comes to the actual amounts, I'm going to break it down in regards to endurance athletes, team sports, strength and power sports, and then physique athletes or enthusiasts. First things first, endurance athletes, 0.5 to 1 grams per pound of body weight is pretty much the recommended amount for people who fall in that category. We're talking endurance runners, maybe longer distance track athletes, but probably not, mainly towards cross-country athletes and stuff of the sort. That low end of 0.5 grams per pound of body weight is more suited towards intense bouts of training, where carbohydrates, which as we discussed before, translates into blood glucose, which is ideal for performance and immediate energy. So we'll drop it to 0.5 to be able to max out our carbohydrates, also taking into account that calorie balance is also kept in check. That high end of 1 gram is best suited towards extended periods of time where either training is reduced or it's some type of it would be some type of off season where carbohydrate doesn't need to be absolutely maxed out. So we can perhaps focus on increasing protein in order to conserve muscle in, I guess, this athlete's off season. When it comes to team sports, we can elevate that to about 0.6 to 1.5 grams per pound of body weight, somewhere around there. The reason for this is in comparison to endurance athletes who are usually very thin because their sport doesn't require a large amount of skeletal muscle. Team sport athletes, we're talking soccer, basketball. I don't know, Matt, shoot some more sports at me. Volleyball.
I think you've covered like the basics:
Pretty
basketball,
much.
soccer, volleyball.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a couple more that fall more under strength and power, so I'll cover that in a second. But again, for your standard
Tennis.
team sport, tennis, that's another one. Yeah, I guess I would categorize that under team sport demand. But again, these sports require a little bit more skeletal muscle than your average endurance runner, and they can thus benefit from a higher protein intake to build and maintain any skeletal muscle that they've accumulated over time. Also, their energy demands tend to be a little bit lower in comparison to endurance athletes, simply because their sports are a lot more stop and start in comparison to an endurance athlete who is consistently just pushing forward. So the team sport athlete would thus require a little bit less carbohydrate, as again their energy demands are a little bit lower, and thus in order to maintain that overall calorie balance, they can increase their protein and then just drop the carbs. When it comes to strength and power sport athletes, we're talking football, powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting, I guess certain track and field events like long jump, shot put, and stuff like that, where maximum power output is probably a little bit more important. Mm-hmm. We can elevate that to 0.7 to 2 grams per pound of body weight. 1 gram seems to be a pretty good average for the most part. These athletes, they need considerably more muscle mass strength and typically periodized weight training, and thus they would require more protein in order to satisfy those demands. Also, their total energy expenditure is typically much lower than those other two aforementioned categories of athletes, simply because they aren't as consistently over an extended period of time expending as much energy. Yep. So their carbohydrates overall can be reduced even a little bit more. However, we can also consider that these athletes, they have more of a periodized approach to their training, so they can go through phases where training is much lower, protein can be elevated, carbohydrates can be dropped, and when training intensity increases, overall volume, load, and stuff like that, then we can reduce protein to levels that are more concerned with conserving muscle mass, maybe on that low end of 0.7, and elevate carbohydrates as much as they can in order for performance-based improvements. So those are our team sports. Now if we move to maybe more general population or physique athletes or enthusiasts, we can kind of divide this into two different scenarios: people in a hypocaloric diet or in a calorie deficit, and people in a hypercaloric diet or a calorie surplus.
So
for people who are in that
just jump in there. Just go over sort of our hypocaloric and hypercaloric, just as a recap of last week. So again, hypo being the deficit of whatever. So we talk about hypocaloric. That means you're, I guess, we already said it's a calorie deficit. You're under that amount of calories that your body technically is, that BMR, right? And then we talk about hypocaloric, you're over, so you have an excess of calories.
Pretty much. So going back to this, when we look at our calorie deficit,
it's a tough word for some reason when you say it fast.
My brain just turned off midway. When we look at our calorie deficit, we're elevating protein to about 1 to 1.5 grams per pound of body weight. This low end of 1 gram allows for enough intake to assist in preventing muscle loss. This is assuming that this individual, that is their primary goal, to reduce body fat while maintaining muscle mass. If they honestly don't care about losing any muscle mass, then they can obviously go a little bit lower and increase carbohydrate or fat intake if they so choose. And that... Sorry, muscle... Oh, yes. So that low end allows for sufficient intake to prevent muscle loss, and allows for more calories to be allocated towards carbohydrate, which can be, I would say, reserved for shorter dieting periods for the most part. We also have to remember that carbohydrates are pretty important when it comes to anti-catabolism. And if anybody's wondering what catabolism means, that means the breakdown of skeletal muscle for energy. So by having higher carbohydrates, you're actively working against that process of breaking it down, because you are providing your body with immediate energy so it doesn't have to go to skeletal muscle. But, so anyways, back to these recommendations. When we look at that high end of 1.5, that is more the case where we are reserving it for longer term diets, simply because over an extended period of time, the body's, I guess, tendency to move towards skeletal muscle as a source of fuel might increase. And we also want to consider that if we're in a diet for an extended period of time, adherence, diet fatigue all start to become relevant factors. So by including a higher amount of protein, we also increase we increase, how would I phrase this? By increasing protein, we are sparing muscle as we have more essential amino acids and stuff like that in order to prevent the body from moving towards skeletal muscle. And, oh yes, protein is much more satiating than carbohydrate, and not as much as fat, but it is fairly satiating. So when you are in that deeply depleted long-term diet state, you essentially, by consuming more protein, you have a lower tendency of perhaps cheating on your diet or simply just feeling a little bit fuller. But yes, so that was a little bit more complicated than it needed to be, but 1 to 1.5 is essentially the range. When we move to a hypercaloric diet or a calorie surplus, we actually reduce that protein intake, which to 0.7 to 1.5 grams per pound of body weight, which totally makes sense. Since we're in a state where catabolism isn't really a factor, we can kind of reduce our total protein intake to levels where it still promotes muscle growth, because again, we still require those amino acids, those essential amino acids from protein to build muscle. However, we can max out our carbohydrate, which is pretty important for performance, and by driving better performance, we can train better, stimulate more adaptation, and thus grow more muscle, which is primarily the purpose for most people who go into a calorie surplus. Most people, they prefer to put on skeletal muscle mass and not body fat.
Right.
When it comes to that low end, exactly what I said, allows us to max out carbohydrate. 1.5 is the upper limit, and essentially we won't really want to increase it past 1.5. At least for some people, I like to go in a little bit higher to maybe, actually no, I usually sit between 1.25 and 1.5 grams per pound of body weight. But essentially, if you would increase it past 1.5, you run into the problem of cutting into your calories allocated towards carbohydrate, which we always have to keep in mind because we always have to be considering calorie balance overall. You don't want your surplus to be too big, because then you run into the risk of accumulating too much body fat and essentially not enough muscle mass, which kind of defeats the entire purpose of going into a surplus if your goal is to add skeletal muscle mass. But yeah, so that's protein. Just quickly, I'm going to make this one a little bit shorter. When it comes to carbohydrates, where did it go? I had it here. I had that slide. I think I lost it.
You're talking about slide 22 here on your presentation?
Yeah, I was supposed to have a 23. Anyways, I can kind of go off the cuff. I'm not going to have the exact numbers when it comes to different team sports, but from what I remember, for the most part, the low end usually ranges for carbohydrate regardless of team sport or typically, or physique athlete or stuff of the sort. I'm going to quickly, I guess, preface by saying, as kind of restating what we talked about previously about carbohydrate. Carbohydrate, essentially, its purpose is an more immediate fuel source for the body's cells in order to complete various functions, whether that be training or simply just being alive in general. Ideally, it's probably a better source, or not probably. In most studies, it's shown it's a better source than protein and fat, simply because the processes that it goes through in order to create this into energy are just a lot quicker.
Yep.
Off the top of my head, when it comes to most athletes, we're usually at least having it around 1 gram per pound of body weight to all the way up to 5 grams. When it comes to the various categories, if I remember correctly, endurance athletes typically are maxed out when it comes to their carbohydrate, usually all the way up to perhaps that 5 grams per pound of body weight, keeping calorie balance all into consideration. And moving down, team sport athletes can be a little bit less. Strength and power athletes can be a little bit less as well. The whole purpose behind that is endurance athletes typically burn through the most amount of energy and constantly require a recycling of carbohydrate or simply use of glucose over time, because they're simply going through extended periods of burning through energy. Team sport athletes, again, it's a little bit more stop and start, so they can reduce their overall carbohydrate and maybe increase their fats and their protein. While strength and power athletes, as I said before, it's a lot more periodized, so their carbohydrate can be reduced even more if it allows for more protein or perhaps even more dietary fat. So 0.5 to 5 grams is typically, from what I remember, the appropriate range. If you're an athlete and you're listening to this, honestly, just try and experiment with what works the best and what you function with. First, I would say identifying your minimum amount of fat, being 0.3 grams per pound of body weight, and finding a minimum amount of protein that is sufficient for you to maintain the weight or amount of muscle mass that you require to complete your sport, and then play around with your carbohydrate to see where you perform better and where you just feel the best. When it came to physique athletes or fitness enthusiasts, carbohydrate is usually one of the first things that we're going to manipulate when it comes to reducing or increasing calories. When it comes to being in a calorie deficit or hypocaloric state, carbohydrates are typically one of the things that we chop off for the most part first, after we've addressed minimum amounts of dietary fat and minimum amounts of protein. Something to consider, from what I remember, is 1 gram per pound of body weight is typically the minimum, all the way up to maybe 3 grams per pound of body weight, but it could be wrong. Ideally, the main thing to keep in mind is regardless of the actual specific amount, we want to take into consideration that carbohydrate has a pretty important effect when it comes to maintaining muscle mass as well as powering training, which is going to be what signals the body to not go towards that muscle mass as a primary source of fuel as you start to lose more weight. So just keep in mind, the lower in carbohydrate that you go, the shittier performance is probably going to be. So I would say try and keep carbohydrate as high as you can while you're dieting, and while also maintaining your calorie balance and making sure your protein isn't too low and your fat isn't too low. Sounds a little bit more confusing than it actually is, but simply don't drop your carbs all the way down, because your performance is going to suck. And if your performance sucks, you can't do what you need to do to conserve mass. When it comes to a hypercaloric diet or a calorie surplus, it's kind of the opposite. Here, we start really delving into these carbohydrates to fuel as much performance as we can. Then we start looking at perhaps that 1 gram per pound of body weight all the way up to 5 grams per pound of body weight. Again, as we spoke about earlier, or more in depth in the previous podcast, the more carbohydrate we increase, the more readily available fuel we have to perform. When we're in a surplus, again, ideally we're trying to build more skeletal muscle, so having available stores of glucose, that being carbohydrate, is pretty important when it comes to trying to fuel that performance to build more mass. When it comes to the actual parameters, kind of the same thing that I discussed previously. Set fats to minimum levels, see where protein can be at in order to maximize your carbohydrates as much as you can. So the final one to discuss were fats, which I actually did have my slides, so I can make this a little bit more concise. When it comes to fat intake, we have to remember that dietary fat is probably the least important when it comes from a performance standpoint, at least when it comes to any type of athletic activity or training or whatever else. Simply because Dietary fat can't exactly be mobilized as quickly as carbohydrate can, so it's not exactly the most desirable fuel source if the goal is performance. We're going to just discuss a little bit later about, in fact, I'll just say it right now. When it comes to general health, though, when it comes to fat intake, Health Canada recommends usually about 20 to 35% of total caloric intake coming from fat, which is probably about 0.3 grams per pound of body weight. Anything more than that is probably less than ideal for performance. Based on what I said before, it's much slower to mobilize, so it's not exactly a very good fuel source. When it comes to the specific recommendations for all three endurance athletes, team sport athletes, and strength and power athletes, we can put that at a minimum of 0.3 grams per pound of body weight. From a health standpoint, putting it all the way up to 35% wouldn't be unhealthy, but it wouldn't be optimal, simply because all these athletes require a certain amount of carbohydrate. So if you increase your fats, you have to reduce the energy from somewhere. Ideally, you don't want it to be protein, simply because you don't want to lose any mass or strength or power that you need for your sport, that you need to be successful in your sport. You don't want to reduce it from carbohydrate because you also need that carbohydrate to perform well. So it would make no sense to increase that fat.
So
When it comes,
sorry, I have a
yeah,
question.
go for it. Yes.
So I guess we'll provide an example for a hypocaloric and a hypercaloric diet here. But what would be the ideal macronutrient division in terms of percentages? Because we talk about, like, we don't want 35% of our we don't want that 35% to be fat, right? But we also don't want to be taking too many calories away from protein and carbohydrates. So ideally, in both of those scenarios, what would be the ideal split when we talk about our macronutrients?
When it comes to dietary fat, it's a very simple 0.3 grams per pound of body weight across all different types of athletes, regardless of their weight goals and stuff like that. 0.3 is pretty good. When it comes to carbohydrates, in fact, I'll touch on that last. Protein, we're looking at maybe between like 0.7 all the way up to 1.5 or 2 grams. Somewhere in that range, I would say 1 gram is probably the safest bet. So we could say for sure 0.3 grams per pound of body weight, probably for sure 1 gram per pound of body weight. And when it comes to carbohydrates, you literally just fill in the rest.
Okay. And
so that would be my practical advice for an athlete. 0.3 for fat, 1 gram for protein, and then fill in the rest with carbohydrates and see how you feel, and then play around with the distributions however you think you perform best.
Right.
Really. That would be my recommendation. And again, that goes into the hypocaloric and the hypercaloric talk when it comes to a surplus or deficit in regards to dietary fat. Same thing for athletes. 0.3 seems to be the sweet spot for most people in regards to general health and performance. If you're in a calorie deficit, as we spoke before, increasing it doesn't make too much sense, simply because you would take too many calories you need from protein and carbohydrate. If you're in a surplus, however, increasing it past 0.3 would make sense, in the sense that dietary fat does have 9 calories per gram, making it very calorie dense, which, if you are an individual who struggles to put on weight simply due to the fact that you struggle to eat a lot, it would make sense maybe elevating it up a cup, maybe to 0.5 grams per pound of body weight, simply because calories at the end of the day make up 50% of our total equation. And if you're really concerned about somebody was calling me. But yeah, so if you struggle to put on weight, increasing dietary fat would be a sensible thing, as long as you don't increase it too much to the point where you start cutting into your carbohydrates. Because in a calorie surplus, you really want to max out that carbohydrate in order for performance. So 0.3 across the board for fat intake is what I'd say, regardless of health and performance, as a minimum. Grams per pound. So if we're talking kgs, that would be like 0.66, 0.64, somewhere around there. Yeah. 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 Yeah, yeah. If you you put it in kgs, it's gonna get messed up a little bit. What was I gonna say? But yeah, so the resource that I was using is the RP Diet 2.0, created by a bunch of different health professionals. A lot of PhDs came into that ebook that I'm using
I
as
just
a
realized
reference for a
I was
lot of the
muted
stuff.
when I explained all of that because I was typing on my keyboard to research something. So yes, as I was just saying, that's to summarize the gist of everything I just said while I was muted. David was not talking to himself for our audio listeners. That is all of these numbers we're throwing out here is grams per 1 pound of body weight. Sometimes we use kilograms, sometimes we use pounds. For this instance, we are using pounds. And yeah, sorry, I should not have muted myself. I'm just gonna, if I have to type something, y'all are gonna have to listen to it because I will never remember to unmute myself.
You know, it's funny. My girlfriend, she was the one who was calling me, and then she just texted me. She was like, "I can't hear him."
Oof. Well, now we know.
Malaya, if you're listening, you can type in the chat, please.
All right.
Anything doesn't really matter. But yeah, so like I was saying before, the reference that I was using are a lot of American, well, not doctors, but health professionals. So obviously they were using more of the not imperial, the metric. No, am I right? The imperial system.
Pounds are
Or
imperial. Metric is
yes,
kilograms.
yes. But yeah, so they wrote a lot of that stuff in what's it called, in imperial. So that's the reference that I'm using. To be fair, even in general, I always use pounds over kgs. I don't know why, it just makes more sense to me.
I just use kilograms because like that seems to be the universal metric that everybody uses. It seems outside of America, everyone seems to use kilograms, so it just makes it easier for conveying information. Like literally all of the text, all of the resources I have are all in kilograms.
Sense. Matt, would you be able to pull up this graphic that essentially summarizes everything that I talked about? Slide 25.
Can you just send me the image, perhaps?
Yes. Yeah, that would work. Hold up. I don't know how I would do this.
Where did you get the image from?
It was a screenshot from the ebook.
Okay.
So that might be a little bit difficult.
You can send me the file.
That work.
I wish you could download things from Google Docs. I don't understand why you can't download images from Google Docs. You can upload them, but you can't download them. Unless I'm just bad at using Google Docs, but I'm fairly certain. But for those wondering what this is, it's basically a breakdown per basically everything we've been talking about up till now. Which I wish I knew about this before, because this would have been very useful.
It's essentially, it just summarizes everything that I've talked about when it comes to guidelines and stuff like that, as well as general health. So for anybody who's listening, give us like another 30 seconds, and I think we might be able to pop it up on the screen.
I can also.
Should I just email it?
Yeah.
Should I just email it to you?
I don't know. I can also just do this the super scuffed way and just screen capture it, but hold on, give me a second. Whoops. We're getting there.
We're getting there.
Window capture, boom. New one. It's gonna be. Oh no! Now everybody can see what I'm doing. Well, I can't do it because the option is not here. That's fine. Whatever.
That's okay.
No one has to know. Yeah, keep talking.
Not a big deal.
We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. Don't worry about it.
Not a big deal.
Don't worry about it.
But yeah, so if you want to know what we're talking about, you're just going to have to listen to me talk until we get the graphic up. But anyways, so that's macronutrients. I wanted to, I guess, go into a little bit more detail when it came to the actual distributions for anybody who was interested, specifically those, athletes and stuff who are trying to design their diet and kind of play around with their macro ranges and stuff like that. So next thing that we probably want to discuss in regards to the grand equation of dieting is food composition. Ideally, I wanted to talk about food composition ahead of nutrient timing, simply because if you talk about nutrient timing before food composition, and if you don't understand why certain foods are allocated where, it wouldn't really make too much sense. So we're going to move with food composition first when it comes to this current episode. So food composition represents about 10% of our total diet priorities in regards to overall physique and just general performance. Actually, no, I would say just general physique for the most part. That's something also to keep in mind, is that's the reference point that we're using. When it comes to general health, food composition is probably much higher in regards to...
I did it. Sorry.
You got it?
Yeah.
You got it?
I worked some magic and I found the figure. I'm not even going to throw it in like the thing. I'm just going to maximize it on screen and just quickly go over it.
Sure.
But yeah, though, this figure is basically just going over everything we just talked about to summarize. So if you do need to take a look at this study, if you're watching on YouTube, just pause. Even if you're watching on Twitch, just pause, take a look over it. It's going to just quickly summarize everything we said. Remember, this is always going to be grams per pound. It is not grams per kilogram. It is going to be grams per pound of body weight in terms of all of these recommendations.
Yep. So if you are interested, if you fall within any of these categories, go ahead and screenshot it, play around with whatever diet app that you use, and keep in mind this is all in regards to maintaining a certain calorie balance. So again, you can't necessarily max everything all the way out, because you'll probably go over the calories that you have set for whatever goal that you have, unless you don't really care about that and you just want to play around with macronutrients. But I digress. That is pretty much the last little bit to go over when it comes to macro breakdown.
Cool.
Back to food composition. It's a good chart. It's a good chart to reference when it comes to trying to figure where to distribute things out.
For sure.
But yeah, so back to food composition. 10% of the total equation. Calories represents 50%. Macros represents 25%, which represents 75% of the equation. Another 10, 85%. So if you do 85% of the things we kind of discussed, you're pretty much solid when it comes to your diet goals. But back to food composition. What is it? It kind of refers to just the quality overall of the food. It's a pretty vague term. So we have some distinguishing characteristics that you can use to determine what is good quality food, which is going to be nutrient density. So micronutrients, minerals, vitamins, stuff like that. How many of those are found in that specific food. The nutrient variety, pretty much what I just said, essentially how varied of the different micronutrients and vitamins and stuff are in that food. And digestibility, so digestion time, as well as how well the body can actually absorb those nutrients and calories and stuff like that. Like I said, food composition has a much bigger role when it comes to overall health. So again, that 10%, think of more in regards to physique sport and overall athletic performance. If I was going to give it a number in regards to overall health, you'd probably just reduce the percentage of macronutrients to 15 and probably give food composition 15 as well, somewhere around there. But it would just be more important.
Right.
So, you were going to say something about it, or are you just agreeing?
No, I'm just agreeing.
Oh, okay, cool.
I'm just the echo chamber here.
Okay. So, when it comes to food composition, we're going to discuss protein quality, carbohydrate quality, and fat quality. As we talked about before, we gave you numbers in regards of where to fall when it comes to planning your overall diet. But now, when it comes to the actual nitty-gritty contents of the diet, this is where the composition of the food kind of comes into the equation. So, when it comes to determining what is a good quality protein, we're going to look at three factors. That being, when we're looking at the composition of our protein, The three factors are going to be quality, digestibility, and micronutrient density of that protein. When I'm referring to quality, I'm mainly referring to the ratios and types of amino acids it contains. Like we talked about earlier, the essential amino acids found within protein is what actually is the building blocks of skeletal muscle and other structures within the body. A protein containing all the essential amino acids, off the top of my head, I think there's 23 or 24. Sorry. There's 24 or 23 amino acids in general, and I think 8 or 9 of them are essential. But that's
I think 9 of them are essential. I thought there was only 22 amino acids, but I could be wrong about that. But I do know that there's 9 essential amino acids.
Yeah. So those essential amino acids are essential amino acids that I believe you can't be produced by the body and must be consumed through food. But what that has to do with this talk right now is that we're going to kind of classify in regards to protein quality 2 classifications. We have complete proteins, which have all 9 essential amino acids, and incomplete proteins, which may have some of the other 22 or 23, but do not contain all 9 of those essential amino acids that are pretty much crucial when it comes to building skeletal muscle. Some examples of complete proteins include all animal products and whey/casein protein powder or protein isolate.
Which we're going to talk about a little bit later.
Yes, sir. But when it comes to incomplete proteins, that's mainly vegetable-based products. So beans are pretty high sources, nuts, stuff like that, legumes, any type of vegetable you can really think of is more likely than not going to be an incomplete protein. However, when we talk about perhaps the mixing of different proteins, we kind of move into the territory of something called complementary proteins or a complementary state, which essentially would mean is we're consuming various incomplete proteins that have some but not all of the essential amino acids, but when you bring them together, they form, I guess, a complete amino acid profile, being all 9 essential amino acids. So that kind of creates this complementary state where even though you're not eating them from like the best sources or complete sources, by combining different incomplete sources together, you kind of, I guess, make up for that lack of all the essential amino acids. This is more important for individuals who are primarily concerned with building muscle mass, as you essentially want to consume or a decent amount of, or essentially get all your amino acids within a day. But back to what I was saying before. So from a muscle building or retention perspective, you don't necessarily need to get a complete protein source in every single meal, or every protein needs to be that complete protein source, because as we discussed, there's complementary states of protein. However, it's probably recommended that the majority of your protein, or at least the majority of the amino acids you're consuming, fill out that full 9 essential amino acid profile. Sounds a little bit confusing, but what I'm trying to say is make sure most of your foods are probably from animal-based products. If you're not into animal-based products, at least like maybe a whey or protein source, but I just took that as a byproduct of milk production.
I was gonna say whey protein is an animal byproduct.
So essentially, if you're a vegetarian, you might need to increase your total protein consumption at the end of the day in order to always be creating like a complementary state, simply because you don't fill out the entire amino acid profile. Is it impossible to build muscle with a vegetarian diet? Of course not. But it does make it a little bit more difficult in the sense that you might have to consume overall more very different protein sources because you're trying to desperately get all those different amino acids. But yeah, so to sum it, quality refers to if it's a complete or an incomplete protein. Complete have all amino acids, incomplete don't have all the amino acids. So now we move to digestibility. Sip of water first, then Mammoth Mug. Sponsor us, please. Digestibility kind of refers to how well that protein can be absorbed and utilized by the body once you consume it. As we discussed before, complete proteins are usually animal-based products, and these animal-based products such as dairy, eggs, and isolated protein powders tend to be also the most completely digested protein. If you notice, I didn't mention meat or something else quickly mention. Meat or, I guess, fish products as well. They are a close second behind. They aren't as easily digested by the body, but they still are up there. when we're looking at our incomplete proteins or our plant-based proteins, these are usually the least efficiently absorbed protein because for the most part, or not for the most part, almost all, or not almost all plant-based products, they have a wall of cellulose, which what that essentially is, it's this component of the plant cell wall that kind of surrounds the, it's probably not the best way to say it, but you could say the essential amino acids are in here, and there's cellulose all around, kind of keeping them hostage. The human gut can't necessarily digest cellulose efficiently or at all in some cases, so it makes it more difficult for the body to digest those amino acids and get to work with those resources. So to sum that up, animal-based products are digested easily, which means that the body can more readily avail or more quickly and efficiently use that protein, while plant-based products, they require a little bit more time and they also don't have the full breakdown. If you were looking for some way to, I guess, quantify like by a score or a number, the protein digestibility corrected amino acid score, or the PDCAAS, is kind of the gold standard for evaluating the quality of a protein source. When we look at that method, it's a score of 1 to 0. 1 being the highest possible score, meaning that the protein source contains all of the essential amino acids, and it can be digested fairly easily and absorbed as well. When it comes to the lower end of the score, anywhere in the point whatever, all the way to 0, that essentially means that 1, it doesn't digest very easily, and it doesn't have all essential amino acids. A score of 0 would essentially provide no accessible essential amino acids. You don't even have to worry about digestibility because there's no essential amino acids. So 0 to 1, that's the score. A 1, from what I understand, is only found in whey isolate proteins, not even like meats or other food sources contain it, simply because a whey isolate protein is exactly what it is. It's whey isolate, or just isolated protein for the most part. So it is the easiest to digest, and it contains all the amino acids.
So that's basically it's basically like a glycemic index except for like protein.
It literally is the glycemic index for protein, pretty much. It digests quicker, and it has all the amino acids as well. Yeah, pretty much. So
sorry, I keep interrupting. What was that called again?
The PDCAAS, or the protein digestibility corrected amino acid score. So yeah, it's a little bit different because it's from. Actually, no. I swear we'll talk about glycemic index in a second. I'm forgetting how that scoring method works, but I think it's a little bit different for the most part.
It's different, but it's a similar concept.
Yeah. And then finally, the final aspect to consider when it comes to protein composition is the overall micronutrient density. This is a little bit more relevant to health rather than performance, and simply because this is referring more to the ratio of like vitamins, minerals, fiber, phytochemicals that are present within that food. Similarly, as we talked before, we can divide it into animal versus plant-based products. Animal products tend to be rich in a number of vitamins and minerals, which plants tend to lack or have in smaller quantities, while plant-based products tend to be higher in fiber and phytochemicals and lower and less healthy classes of fat. But overall, those are the 3 ways of determining protein composition, going by quality, digestibility, and micronutrient density. Before I go on to carbohydrates, I guess it would make a little bit sense to discuss, I guess, some examples of what that would all look like in regards to actual food for athletes that are interested. Let me pop up. I had a little chart. I actually had a PC. I forget how the acronym, but I had a little chart illustrating the different ones. Anyways, not really important, but when it comes to examples, whey isolate was one of the ones that we discussed. Digests very quickly, has a pretty high score, indicating that it's utilized very efficiently. Chicken breast, turkey breast, their various perhaps lower fatty fishes are also an option, all the way down to just foods that simply have no amino acids, like some carbohydrates, some fats, and stuff like that. Matt, do you have a preferred protein source, or one that is just easiest for you to consume?
I mean, when we talk about ease of consumption, I mean, I would say, protein powders and making protein shakes is probably the easiest, just because, you can just toss it in a blender, toss it in a shaker or whatever, and
Yeah.
just go. But I mean, I do eat a lot of meat as well. I think all of my daily meals do include a large amount of meat-based protein as well. So eggs also, I would say, in terms of
Yes.
like my favorite as in like what packs a punch, I would say eggs for sure, because I mean eggs are perfect for making sure you're getting a lot of protein in a relatively small package. It's also easy to make.
That is very true. Convenience is a big thing. Hold up, I think I found what I was looking for.
I'm also looking up for PDCAAS. Like,
Here it is.
how do you
Here it
how do
is.
you how does that roll off the tongue? The PDC
I
PDC ass. I mean, let's be honest.
PDC,
Let's go.
yes,
That's what we're all thinking here.
it's PDC ass. But yeah, from the chart that I'm looking at right here, milk protein such as casein and whey have that perfect score. In fact, egg protein also has a perfect score as one as well.
I've won, yeah.
Yeah, soy protein
I'm gonna
has
take this and I'm gonna toss it up.
0.99. Beef has 0.92. And then we start moving into our plant-based proteins such as chickpeas,
Oops,
black beans, peanuts, rice. Ooh, did you put it up?
I did.
Nice. So whoever's watching, you can kind of see as the more plant-based you go, the lower the score moves. I don't know. Does it show a? It doesn't show a score of 0, but as you
No,
can see, as it starts moving towards more fibrous, fibrous plant proteins such as like wheat gluten and whole wheat, it goes all the way down to 0.25, indicating that it has a lower amino acid score, aka the number of the ratio of number of those 9 essential amino acids, and it just digests slower. Doesn't mean it's bad. However, it does mean that the body isn't going to utilize it as effectively. I'm trying to think this off the top of my head in regards to just general recommendations that I would
so
give.
actually, just looking at this chart, it looks like I was pretty on point with my favorite methods of protein consumption. I said egg and protein, which are both perfect scores of 1 here, and then beef is just a little bit lower than that. So I'd say I'm doing pretty good for packaging up my protein consumption here.
Pretty much. I'm trying to think how to put this in one statement. Okay, I'm not gonna say it like this. When it comes to people who are primarily interested in performance and stuff like that, move towards more plant-based. Sorry, not plant-based. Opposite. More animal-based proteins that have a higher score. That since they have more amino acids and more essential amino acids, and they digest quicker. Make sure you're getting a varied amount to make sure you're getting all the micronutrients that you need for general health. And take a look at your ratio of protein that you need for whatever sport or activity that you're doing. When it comes to when to consume it, we'll get onto that in a little bit later when it comes to nutrient timing. So that's protein. Let's move on to carbohydrate. When it comes to carbohydrate composition, there's 2 main factors to consider, that being digestion time or glycemic index, which we briefly mentioned previously, and also, as we mentioned when it comes to protein, micronutrient composition. So, for some people, this might be the first time you ever heard of glycemic index. We're just going to quickly go over it. Essentially, it's a way to measure how quickly a source of carbohydrate is digested and absorbed into the bloodstream. These values are ranked on a scale of 0 being the lowest up to 100. So it's pretty similar to the other scale we were using. It's just you just switch up the decimal place a little bit. Quickly digested carbohydrates sources cause pretty rapid spikes in blood sugar, resulting in high glycemic index value. Stuff like pure dextrose powder, which is literally just pure carbohydrate powder, probably has a score of about 100. Same with other like sugary foods and stuff like that.
I just threw it up
Slowly
on the screen
digest.
there just as a visual aid.
Let's take a look. If anybody's wondering why it takes me so long to talk after Matt says he slapped an image up, it's because mine is a little bit delayed. Yep, there you go. That's a nice little scale for people to look at as I'm talking. Slowly digested carbohydrate sources cause more gradual and sustained elevations in blood sugar, and therefore have lower glycemic index values. When we talk about glycemic index, this matters a lot less for people interested in like physique sport or just general like health in general, and more for people who have conditions where they have to be constantly monitoring their blood glucose, primarily being diabetes, whether it be type 1 or type 2. You constantly have to be making sure you're keeping your overall blood sugar under control to make sure you don't go hypoglycemic, being your blood sugar falls way too low, or hyperglycemic, meaning it spikes way too high, because that can result in some pretty not fun things for people with diabetes. When we look at that chart, I don't know if you still have it up, Matt.
I did. It was a little bit scuffed, but I moved it to my actual infographic slide here.
Okay.
Just it
Nice.
was bothering me aesthetically, just slapping up figures on top of our faces. So
When we look at it, we can actually kind of take note that the more whole food or the less processed a food is, the higher the score is going to be. I think white bread and bagels here have a score of 100. What else? Whole wheat is a 71. But yeah, the more processed, for the most part, not always. When we look at baked potatoes, it actually has a pretty high score. Same with oatmeal and stuff like that. But the more processed, the higher the score, simply because the more processed, the more easily it is for the body to break down that carbohydrate source. While the less processed or the more whole / maybe it contains higher amounts of fat, protein, or dietary fiber, the lower that score is going to be, simply because it takes longer for the body to absorb it, process it, and thus results in more sustained but lower spikes in blood sugar over time. And like I said, keep in mind, once you start combining carbohydrates with other food sources like fiber, fats, and protein, the glycemic index score kind of becomes a little bit less relevant, simply because those other compounds are going to slow overall digestion. To give an example, if you have a super sugary cereal and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to eat this because it's going to spike my blood sugar, I'll have immediate energy for my workout, but then you smack peanut butter in there as well, a very high fatty carbohydrate source, you are probably going to negate that, simply because the slow digesting effects of the fat is going to negate the fast digesting aspects of that sugary cereal. So that's just something to keep in mind. Just because it has a high glycemic index doesn't mean by mixing it with other things it's going to work the same. Now, when it comes to micronutrient composition of carbohydrate, we have to just keep in mind that we're combining various different combinations of low glycemic index sources, which are typically whole foods, which typically have more micronutrients, vitamins, and stuff like that, with higher glycemic index sources, such as like maybe processed breads, more sugary foods, candies, and stuff like that, simply to make sure that we're not simply getting one simple profile of the different vitamins and minerals and stuff like that. We want to keep it varied for general health. In some cases, it's more optimal to go with less nutritious, higher GI or glycemic index food sources, such as, what's an extreme example? Like I said, sugary cereal, Gatorade, and stuff like that for performance reasons. But you don't want to be consuming exclusively high GI sources like that, because you're going to eventually run into an issue where, although you're getting enough of the macronutrients and enough of the calories to perform, eventually you start running into issues with micronutrient deficiencies, which don't always present themselves as performance, but more general kind of health ramifications for the most part. All right. Matt, do you have anything to add to that?
no, I don't know. For our audio listeners, David just took a swig of his mammoth mug. Yeah.
I do be talking a lot.
Yeah, not too much. Just been over the glycemic index, which I think is the important thing to take into effect here.
Yeah, when it comes at least for performance. So
right, yeah.
For the listeners, the main takeaway I would say is, I just have to burp real quick. When it comes to carbohydrate composition,
let out.
I'm okay. It's okay. It was a quiet one. I'm good. I'm good.
Incognito.
When it comes to our glycemic index, just keep in mind the faster digestion, the more or higher GI or glycemic index, the more readily available that energy is going to be, which would result in you prioritizing, let's say, Gatorade powders, white bread, white bagels, What else? Sugary cereals, perhaps more around times where you acquire that carbohydrate or competition, while prioritizing lower glycemic index foods such as like whole grains. What was I trying to say? Whole grain bagels, whole grain pita, stuff like that. Fruits, vegetables, away from periods, simply because although it's all carbohydrate, you can perhaps prioritize the ones that digest quicker towards periods where you need that energy a little bit more readily available. And we're going to touch on that when it comes to nutrient timing in a little bit more detail in a second. I guess we popped up that little chart so people kind of have an idea of what to look at. You still have it up?
Which one? The glycemic index?
Yeah, the
I
glycemic
did.
index.
I can put it back up here.
Just slap it up real quick. But yeah, so when we look at, I don't know if it's still up at all, act as if it's up. When we look at that chart, if you're watching the recording or watching it live right now,
there's nobody watching live right now.
It's okay. Take a look at that and start distinguishing what common carbohydrates that you typically eat and identifying which have that higher glycemic index and which are going to be more suited towards what periods in the day. But yeah, so we're going to talk about nutrient timing a little bit later so you don't have to think about it too hard. Finally, fat composition. Fat composition is a little more complex but also less important overall when it comes for performance, but it does play a big part when it comes to overall health. When it comes to identifying fat composition, we're mainly looking at the 4 classes of fats, that being monounsaturated fats, polyunsaturated fats, saturated fats, and transsaturated fats. I'll go in order of highest percentage in your diet, ideally to lowest percentage. Number 1, monounsaturated fats. So I'm not going to go into exactly, what constitutes a monounsaturated fat versus a saturated versus unsaturated fat, because that's a biology conversation that I didn't prepare for, and not too important for this conversation. But simply put, monounsaturated fats are found in plant products such as olive oil, canola oil, avocados, and different nuts. This fat type not only promotes better health than others, but also supports leaner, more muscular physiques to some extent. Fat in any diet is focused on health, performance, body composition. Ideally should come primarily from monounsaturated fats. Some examples that I just mentioned: olive oil, canola oil, avocados. From what I remember, I think almonds are a good source of monounsaturated fats. I'm not too sure about peanuts. And when it comes to general composition of your overall fats for the day, they should probably come 45 to 60% come from monounsaturated fats. Moving on to polyunsaturated fats, same as monounsaturated fats, it's an unsaturated type of fat. They can be found in other vegetable oils such as safflower oil, different nuts like walnuts, many fatty seeds, and some animal products like fatty fish and grass-fed animal meat. When it comes to polyunsaturated fats, we can look a little bit even deeper and start looking at things like essential fats, those being omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. Those are a little bit more important. In most diets, omega-6s are consumed in sufficient quantities, but omega-3s are often undereaten. You'll often see people talking about omega-3 fish oils, omega-3 this, omega-3 that. For general health, omega-3 fish oil might be a good idea, but that's probably something you would need to go get some blood work on and kind of determine for yourself. When it comes to distribution, 35 to 50% of your fats should probably come from polyunsaturated fats. When it comes from a health perspective, the research kind of shows it ranges from healthy to just generally neutral for overall health. When we move to saturated fats, which represent 5 to 20% of your overall fat intake, these come from animal products such as dairy, eggs, meat, and coconut oils. Saturated fats have been a pretty hotly debated topic over the last several decades, ranging from very healthy to probably the worst fat that you can consume. These days, the data is kind of mixed, but it kind of shows a general trend that too much saturated fat can have a pretty negative health impact on your health, and they should probably be third in the priority list. And then finally, trans fats. These are actually chemically made. They don't occur very rare instances in naturally occurring foods. And the whole reason trans fats are a thing is to for preservation of different foods and reducing perishability, which makes them great for, let's say, countries who don't have access to refrigeration or simply foods that need to travel a great distance. It makes them great. But all the research kind of indicates that for general health, trans fats are linked to some negative health effects, such as higher rates of cardiovascular and other systemic diseases. So overall, try and keep your trans fats less than 1%. Like we said earlier, fats don't really have too much of a role when it comes to overall performance. So overall, don't pay too much attention to the content of your fat when it comes to your diet, unless health is the greatest priority. In that case, go with polyunsaturated, monounsaturated fats as your priority, and then saturated fats, and then transsaturated fats to an absolute minimum. So that covers everything when it comes to food composition. Matt, do you have anything else to add?
Not particularly. Just we should go over sort of where you can find like examples of these different kinds of fats. I know we talked a little bit about monounsaturated, where we can find those, but just kind of more examples of, and to help us kind of stay away from the fats that we don't particularly need, just so we know what kind of fats are in what.
Sure. I don't have a list in front of me, but a quick Google search and a little bit of searching, because I do remember that it can be a little bit confusing sometimes when it comes to distinguishing between mono and polyunsaturated. Sometimes they seem essentially the same sometimes, especially when it comes to different oils. But monounsaturated, we have olive, peanut, canola oils, avocados, various nuts such as almonds, hazelnuts, and pecans, and pumpkin and sesame seeds. So we got 3 different categories. We got oils, avocados is its own category, nuts and seeds. So if you're, designing your diet and you're trying to determine, okay, where do I get my fats, those are probably a good place to start. Nuts and seeds can be a pretty good snack, while oils can be actually a fairly healthy dressing and not just for cooking. When it comes to polyunsaturated fats, from what I remember and what I understand, fish is probably what I would prioritize for the most part, simply because we're also looking at those omega-3s and omega-6s, right. Those fatty acids. So getting a little bit of fish in your diet, specifically salmon is a good option, sardines are a good option. I think haddock is also a good option. Various different fishes that are a little bit fattier have those essential fatty acids are pretty good for overall health. Myself, I like sardines. Not for the particular taste, to be quite honest, just because fish can be a little expensive sometimes, and trying to find good quality fish can be a little bit difficult. So I go with food packaged sardines.
It's pretty cheap.
Sorry?
Your tuna and your salmon, like canned fish.
Canned fish is a good option. The only thing that I will say is trying to determine, fish where it's been not so much farmed ethically, but farmed in a way where it's not gonna mess with your health, in regards to like overall like ocean pollution and stuff like that.
Right.
I remember I went with sardines because from what I understand, they live a little bit closer to the ocean floor and thus feed on certain, fungi, or not fungi, but
plankton.
I think plankton or other like plant-based substances at the bottom of the ocean that aren't really affected by like pollution and like mercury and whatever in the water. I'm not too educated on the subject, to be quite honest, so for the viewers listening, some type of fish is recommended to get those different polyunsaturated fats in there. When it comes to the specifics, again, I'd probably either do your own little bit of research when it comes to what's affordable and what's reasonable and what you actually like, and maybe even speak to a dietitian and hear what their perspective is on what is a good fish when it comes to overall health. So that's polyunsaturated fats. Saturated fats, the easiest examples are your eggs, your dairy products, such as like your margarine, your butter, your cheeses. Those are pretty heavy in saturated fats. Fattier meats as well, like beef, some steaks. Beef products are probably the first things that come to mind. Cold cuts also usually have a decent amount of saturated, if not trans fats. Coconut oil as well. In fact, more recently, I've decided to cut down on my saturated fat intake. One, because health reasons, I was like, let's move towards maybe more polyunsaturated fat. So I've introduced sardines in my fish, and simply because I've noticed that some of them, when it comes to digestion, like some dairy products, even though not lactose, it makes my digestion a little bit more complicated. So for those reasons, I've moved away from saturated fats. But if I would say, if not possible, if you can't really get too many monounsaturated or polyunsaturated fats, whatever your situation is, prioritizing saturated over trans fat is definitely something what I would do, and getting to that 0.3 grams per pound of body weight is overall probably more important than it comes in regards to health than the actual contents of the fat. And then finally, trans saturated fats. There's no real natural example to think of, but honestly, your fast food burgers, your fast food meats, some cold cuts, some processed cheeses, any real like greasy or heavily fat processed food most likely has trans fats. Or another way of determining this is foods that normally in regular conditions that would be, from what I understand, a liquid at room temperature, but are now a solid, usually have some type of trans fat. That's not the general rule for everything, but if you see something that doesn't need to be refrigerated, it might have some trans fat just for preservation reasons. But if anything, check the back of the label, check the nutrition facts, and you'll probably be able to determine. In fact, it should say what the breakdown of saturated, monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, or trans fat is. But that's pretty much some clear examples when it comes to fats. Matt, I know you wanted to get onto supplements, right?
Yep. So we can I do that?
We can do.
Do you want to go over just nutrient timing?
We can do. We can do supplements and then round everything off with examples using nutrient timing in regards to how you would actually structure the diet overall.
Works
we could do
me.
that.
Yeah.
We could do nutrient timing to kind of sum it all up.
Cool. Let me get everything that I need here prepared.
Also, I want a quick break from talking real quick.
Yeah. Right, so to date, we've gone over just macronutrient breakdowns, so our proteins and our fats and our carbohydrates, and how to sort of influence our diets to include all of these kinds of things. But one thing that you can't always get from, here's the thing. When it comes to supplements, the term supplement is an addition, right? These are all things with the exception of those essential amino acids that I'll get into a little bit, and we talked a little bit about. Basically, essential amino acids are the amino acids that your body cannot produce and you actually do need to get from external sources. But everything else that we've talked about so far is going to be pretty much sufficient for giving you the stuff that you need to perform and to excel, especially if you fall under the categories and amounts that we have talked about so far. But if you do need to find a way to inject these macronutrients and micronutrients sort of into your diet because you're not getting enough either here or there, especially when we talk about vegan diets as well, to be able to get the supplements that you do, or to be able to get the nutrients that you do need, especially in a diet that does not naturally include all the things that we've talked about, you do need to supplement. So I'm going to talk about a few of the main supplements that you do see that pretty much everyone who will go to the gym seriously or is an athlete likes to talk about. Things that you'll see a lot when you go into just any supplement store, any sports related store. These are kind of the ones that are on display because they are popular, they work, but you might not necessarily know a lot about them. So that's what we're going to go over here. So the first I want to just touch base on is our protein powders. I think everyone who's kind of dabbled in fitness and going to the gym knows at least that like protein powders are a thing that people use and use quite frequently. I mean, you go to the gym and like obviously you've probably seen a lot of these, your average protein shaker. Most people will have these, whether it's for protein powder or other kinds of supplements that I'm also going to talk about. But no, when I want to talk about protein powder is the kind of differences, because there are different types of protein powder. And it can be confusing if you're not exactly aware. Like somebody's going to see protein powder and they're going to go, oh, well, that's protein powder, but there's like 3 or 4 different kinds of protein powder, and trying to figure out what is the best kind of powder for you. How can you work it into your lifestyle, into your diet? So I've got some examples here with me today. We talked a little bit about when we talked about the PDC AAS, your PDCAS.
PCS, yes, sir.
Yeah, which is kind of like that index for how digestible that protein is. On there was whey and casein protein, and now this is kind of the not like a one or the other type deal, but it really falls under kind of what your preference is. Both are advantageous. They both kind of do different things though. So let's talk about that. So we talk about whey protein now. I think the only kind, yeah, I only have whey protein, so I have these little cool little sample packs. I do recommend these. These are actually kind of nice. But I'll talk about my preferred protein powder in a second here when I talk about the other kinds of protein. But yeah, this is going to be your general whey protein. Basically what whey is it's derived from milk. It's basically, if I have this right, it's like when you curdle milk, it's like kind of the byproduct, especially like when you're making cheese. That could be casein. It's one or the other. Either way, it is derived from the process of creating that dairy. So it is animal based. It is an animal protein. So if you are on a vegan diet, it's not going to be as easy to just pop in whey protein. But I'm going to talk about alternatives to that in a second here. But if you are on just a regular diet, you've got whey or casein to choose from. What whey does and why it differs from casein. So we talked a little bit last episode about protein synthesis, right? So that's the process of building muscle, essentially, the biological process that your body does to build muscle mass, and we call that protein synthesis. So what whey protein is going to do during this process is, obviously, when you consume protein, it's going to be using that protein during that process, and it's going to elevate your levels of protein in your body, which is going to help maximize and optimize how efficient that protein synthesis is when it's building your muscle. So the advantage to whey protein is how fast it kind of digests. So if I wish I put together some graphs here, but if I were to just kind of illustrate basically how whey protein works, is it's fast acting, so it's great for maximizing that protein synthesis, which I talked about the muscle full effect last episode, but to recap, there's a certain period of time after your workout where it's most optimal to be in that protein synthesis stage. So if we are trying to target that muscle full effect, whey protein is going to be great for that, simply because when you ingest it, your protein levels go basically way up. And then the only problem with that, though, is about after 3 hours, they just drop right down. But it is very fast acting, like it just shoots right up. It's going to help maximize. I'm just going to keep calling it PS because honestly, I can't say synthesis over and over and over again. It's screwing me up. So I'm just going to call it PS. So it's going to maximize that PS, right? That is the advantage to whey protein. The other thing that you get in whey that you don't necessarily get in other kinds of protein is, we talked a little bit about amino acids, and to break it down, amino acids are the building blocks of a protein, essentially. And we talked about the the nine essential amino acids, and of those 9, which I actually want to talk about in a separate point here, we have what are called branched chain amino acids. So your BCAAs, on a lot of protein powders, you'll see that, say like however many grams of BCAA. So that is your leucine, your isoleucine, and your valine. So those 3 branched chain amino acids, they're just called branched chain just because of the chemical structure of basically how it looks. But the one to focus here on is going to be leucine. So leucine is that one that's going to be very effective for building muscles during that PS process. And in whey protein, leucine is going to be found in rather high amounts. That's kind of what it has over other protein supplements, is that high amount of leucine, which is going to be good for promoting that PS. Now, The other kind here that we have that I don't actually have, because honestly it's kind of hard to find unless you go to like an actual supplement store, is going to be casein protein. Casein, however you want to say it. The difference here, and I think David can attest to this, like it is difficult to find casein if you're not specifically going to like actual supplement stores. Most people just like if you're getting your protein from the grocery store and whatnot, like you're probably not gonna be able to find casein protein. What casein?
For the most part, like I've only ever found casein online.
Yeah, it's difficult. Like the general one that almost all people are going to be using is going to be that whey protein. But if you are looking for casein protein, what casein is going to do is almost opposite to how whey is digested. So casein is a slow digestion. So what that means is it's not going to give you that immediate spike in protein levels. It's going to kind of just go up and then kind of go in that medium range over a longer period of time. So to kind of visualize that, what that's going to be is you just basically have more protein in your body for a longer period of time rather than just a sharp spike. That's going to be available for that protein synthesis. PS, I hate that word, PS.
So yeah, protein uptake.
Which, yeah. So that's going to take around, it's, I would say like 4 to 8 hours of being in your bloodstream before it dissipates, which is going to be optimal for decreasing protein breakdown. So if we talk about protein synthesis, we want whey. That's going to build muscle. If we want to sort of counteract our muscles from breaking down, we want to keep that protein in our bloodstream for as long as we can before it dissipates through our blood. Then we want to go through casein. And the easiest way to take casein is, it's even better if you are a late night exerciser, because you can just take it before bed. You wake up in the morning, like throughout your sleep, you've had elevated levels of protein in your body. The only difference is you don't have too much of that leucine, right? But again, in terms of, like, there's different studies on how effective casein versus whey is when we talk about building muscle and muscle mass and that protein synthesis. I don't know why I keep saying it. But yeah, there's different varying things that people talk about, but for the most part, my own suggestion would be, if you are going for building muscle mass, is like you want to take that whey protein directly after a workout. You're going to get that muscle full effect. You're going to maximize PS and hopefully build some muscle out of it. I mean, that's the mechanical way of how it works. If it's not working, then you probably have another issue here. But for the most part, when we talk about protein powder and using it to build muscle, you want to be using that whey protein after that workout, and it's going to last for about that 3 hours when we have PS occurring. So the other thing that I wanted to touch upon, obviously whey and casein are not the only types of protein you can buy. There's also like whey, like isolates and concentrates, which I think we also talked about a little bit. Now, I'm not too familiar on the difference between an isolate and a concentrate. David, do you know too much about those?
From what I understand, the isolate is what comprises the majority of most whey protein powders, but in regards to the difference, I couldn't really tell you if I can remember what the difference between the isolate and the concentrate is. No. I did want to add one little thing.
Go for it.
Onto the whey and the casein discussion is a simple way of determining when to take what, or in most people's instances, which one to buy, is whey protein powder buys towards periods of activity where you need immediate nutrient uptake or protein uptake. That'd probably be instances where you need to work out, or where you are in a, I guess, catabolic state, which would probably be also after you work out, or after you work out. While casein protein powder can be biased towards periods where, again, you need a slower digestion, a more consistent uptake of protein. And I would bias that towards, again, periods of little activity, and probably towards individuals who are maybe in an extended deficit or an extended period of time, where you require that intake to be very sustained over over an extended period of time.
Right.
But if you have both, whey protein powder during high activity periods, casein protein powder when you want to feel maybe a little bit fuller, or during periods where you're not going to eat much.
Yep. All right. So the other options that I want to go over, because we talk about whey and casein, but obviously those are both animal byproducts. If you are on a vegan diet, you have alternatives that, in my opinion, are just as effective, really. So the protein powder that I have here, that is my personal favorite that I've used for years, is a vegan protein. So it's going to be using plant proteins. Mostly, I believe, pea protein. Yeah, pea protein. That's going to be the biggest one when we talk about plant-derived proteins. I like this one just because of the high concentration of good stuff. So, like, take a look at the stuff here. So, it says we've got our 30 grams of protein, which per scoop, one scoop is 41 grams. And here's the thing when it comes to the labels on protein powder. If you don't really, like, look into it, because, like, when it comes to, and this is honestly a lot of fitness products, any fitness and health products, is the numbers on the packages are technically correct, but if you don't look, like, I'll demonstrate. So on this package of whey protein, it says we have 24 grams of protein per serving. Now this is like a little sample pack. I don't actually have a full tub of this, but if I did, I imagine it would recommend the same amount, which is a 30-gram serving size. You can find all of the numbers you need on the back to sort this out. So we got 30 grams. In that 30 grams, you got 24 grams of protein, right? In my vegan protein, we got our 30 grams of protein, but per scoop is 41 grams, okay? Now, if I were to take this scoop, okay, put it in a tub of this stuff, I would probably get around 30 grams of protein out of this using the serving size of this. So, similar, exact same serving size. Now, you would think 30 grams of protein, 24 grams of protein, this must be better. I mean, if you are using 41 grams of powder for both of these, it's actually basically the exact same. And a lot of packages will say, like recently I saw a package that said like 60 grams of protein on the front. Flip it around to the back, a serving size is one scoop. So a serving size is like 2 scoops, which you don't often see with protein powder. It's usually like per 1 scoop is the serving size. It said like 60 grams of protein, but you look down at the nutrition facts and there's 30 grams per scoop, which is going to be exactly the same as this. If I took 2 scoops of this, I'd also have 60 grams of protein. So again, making sure you're looking on the back and kind of just doing your own math, your own calculations, to trying to figure out actually what the most effective is for you. Honestly, though, I would say like 20 grams and up is going to be the ideal amount. I just prefer this. The problem with vegan protein, and honestly, I'll admit, this stuff doesn't taste the best. Like, this is just a vanilla flavor. This is nice. This is chocolate peanut butter. It's delicious. But I don't know. I've just been using the Vega Sport for so long now that I just, maybe it's.
Have you gotten over the?
Yeah.
You know what a big thing is? It's for some people, a lot of the thing for me and myself. Like, I tried vegan protein powder for a little bit, and I just noticed the texture. The texture is just it has this grainy.
It's very grainy.
Which is likely just the byproduct of it a lot being like rice powder, pea powder.
Smooth. It goes down so smoothly. The Vega Sport, it is grainy, and honestly, if you are going to be taking it, I highly suggest putting it into like a smoothie or something, instead of just tossing it in your shaker and mixing it with, personally, I don't even use water for my protein powder. I just use straight milk, because I think water and protein powder is kind of, I don't like it personally. It's not for me. It's just, especially when you have like things that are like dairy byproducts, you wouldn't mix milk and water together. It's disgusting. You wouldn't do it. So
unless you're struggling.
Why would you mix milk powder and water together? It's the same thing. To simplify it.
I have a counterpoint.
What's your counterpoint?
I would mix it with water simply because when we combine the milk, which has quite a bit of dietary fat, it slows down the fast digesting action of the whey protein.
That is a very good point. I did not consider that. I will still continue to use milk though, because water and protein powder is just simply gross. I can't do it.
Have you ever done the extreme slap the powder in your mouth, drink some water, and whisk it around?
I have, but I forgot the water.
What do you mean you forgot the water?
I just took it dry. I thought I could. I thought my saliva would mix with it. I thought it would, dissolve.
How did it turn out?
No, that was. I don't attempt it. Once I took this stuff and I thought, okay, I'm just gonna get some frozen fruit and I'm just gonna mix it with frozen fruit. Like I'm gonna sprinkle it on top. Don't. It's not good. Yeah, you definitely need to be mixing it with something, and the reason why protein shakes are as popular and as effective as they are is because when it is in a liquid form, it digests faster, right?
Yeah.
Like anything that's in a liquid is always going to digest faster than a solid, so that's why it does come in a powder. That's why we mix it with stuff. We got a bot in our stream. That's awesome.
Oh, that's crazy. I think we're in the big time now.
Oh yeah. I hate how bots don't even count as followers, or as viewers, which is unfortunate. But anyways, so yeah, vegan protein is available if you are vegan. That being said, choose what works best for you. I like to just kind of do whatever I want. One thing that I will say again, and just because it's vegan protein doesn't mean that it's missing any of the essential amino acids. So I think on this one you can see, yeah. So we've got, say, 6 grams of BCAAs in there. So you look on the back and it tells you exactly what's in it. So this one actually has 2.6 grams of leucine in it, which is pretty good considering the recommended amount is around 2 to 2.5 grams of leucine, which is that amino acid that is going to stimulate that PS, that protein synthesis. I'll say it slowly. That protein synthesis. I can't. That PS. But yeah, so and again, obviously I don't know a whole, everything about this stuff. So if you are interested in knowing the difference between all the different types of protein that you might find out there, just look it up, make sure what you're getting is going to work for you, because, different habits, different routines, different, lifestyles are going to be able to determine what kind of protein powder you need. Now, moving on, so we went over protein, which is going to be that big one that you're going to see everyone in the gym using, whether they know how it works or they don't know how it works. I've seen people just taking protein powder just as a drink, but I guess if you want to get your daily protein intake that way, then sure, but protein powder has a use, and we talk about that protein synthesis and that muscle full effect. That is when to take protein powder. That's why it's effective. That's really why it exists, and that's what people mostly use it for. Moving on to something that, again, should really only be used for workout purposes, we have our pre-workout. Now, I got this one just because I was curious, because I'd never really tried pre-workout before. Just because, like we talked about on our sleep episode, I pretty much just...
Oh, it's C4.
Yeah, listen.
It's C4.
Listen, it was the only one that we had, okay? So I grabbed this one, just to see what the big deal was. But yeah, like I talked about on the sleep episode, I pretty much just take caffeine pills if I'm looking for the kind of boost in energy, and I would say arguably the most...
Sponsored by Wake Ups.
Yeah. I would say arguably the most the biggest use case for pre-workout is going to be that caffeine content. Because people say, I'm going to take pre-workout to get energized for my workout. Well, that's why there's caffeine in here. And I think that's what most people are trying to use it for. But if you're not trying to get everything else that comes with pre-workout, I would just recommend stick to caffeine. And the healthiest way to do that is honestly caffeine pills, because if you're drinking coffee or energy drinks, you're getting that sugar and everything else that you don't want. So yeah, caffeine pills, that is my endorsement for a pre-workout. Just caffeine pills, it works great. But when we talk about the other stuff that's in here, so you can always look at on the back, there's always going to be a little nutrition facts, probably some warnings too about there's
serving sizes, don't do 3 scoops within how many period of time.
So this little line here is going to be the dosage amount, and then the rest of this is literally health warnings. So be careful with pre-workout, because it does have a lot of stuff that you don't really want in excess, caffeine being one of them. Another thing that pre-workout mostly always contains and is kind of like the calling card of pre-workout is beta alanine. And essentially what beta alanine is like when people take pre-workout, they have or some people tell you it doesn't work with everybody, and if you don't get this sensation, it's totally fine. It doesn't happen
The
with,
jitters.
yeah, the jitters. You get this like tingly feeling almost, right? Like you get tingly feeling. When I first started taking this, I did kind of get a little bit of a tingle in like my fingers, but I think it wore off a little bit. But yeah, people will tell you, oh, I took pre-workout and I was just all jittery and tingly, and that's going to be what that beta alanine is. Beta alanine is a non-essential amino acid, or beta amino acid. But honestly, pretty much every pre-workout that I've seen will include beta alanine. And really all this does is it just raises your muscle carnosine levels, which is just a molecule that does help with working at like high intensities and performance and stuff like that. So would I say beta alanine is essential in a pre-workout? Not really. It's more of a cool bonus, but again, you never want too much of it, so moderate yourself when you are taking pre-workout, and only be taking it if you are going to be working out, because there are adverse side effects to taking pre-workout and not actually putting your body through what you're preparing it for. So we talked about the beta alanine content, the caffeine content. If you want to know more about caffeine, we did a podcast about sleep aids, sleep inhibitors. Caffeine was one of those inhibitors, so check that out.
There was actually two things that I wanted to mention real quick with pre-workout. From what I understand, there's also two other compounds, L-citrulline and L-arginine, that are also usual like staples when it comes to pre-workouts. I may be wrong with this, but from what I understand, I think it helps with those two compounds, or one or the other helps with vasodilation, which is simply just opening up the blood vessels, allowing more muscle, which kind of helps with that whole, I think everybody's realized, come to that point where you're like, you're training biceps or arms or whatever, and you get that pump in your arms. Several pre-workouts, they have pump products, which I believe are L-arginine and L-citrulline, that help open up the blood vessels, allow easier blood to get into the specific muscle, help with not nutrient uptake, but if the blood vessels are dilated or opened up, it allows nutrients to get to the muscles, which is what eventually results in you getting that pump for the most part. So I may be wrong, but I think it's L-citrulline and L-arginine, but for the most part, pre-workouts, they contain products that, dilate the blood vessels, allow for more blood to get to the target muscle, and kind of help with you to get your pumps.
Yeah. And yeah, I've got L-arginine in this guy, and then the last one that I want to touch base on here that you can get as a separate supplement, as well as, I don't know if it's every pre-workout that's going to include this, but mine certainly does, is creatine. And I'm sure if you've floated around the gym enough, you've probably heard of or seen creatine. And basically what that is it's going to help your muscle cells produce more energy. If I'm going to sort of break this down, so our bodies and our muscle, for all energy processes in all biological life, essentially uses the molecule ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate. It's basically, if I could dumb it down supremely, it's like a bunch of batteries floating around our bodies that are going to be powering the energy source that is our body. So essentially what creatine does, is it basically increases your phosphocreatine stores. And what phosphocreatine does is it basically just aids in the formation of ATP. And eventually, like we have like the rate of ATP resynthesis, which is going to start to limit your ability to continually perform at maximum intensity. So obviously, like high intensity athletes like sprinters, powerlifters, anything that's going to be like a short burst of anaerobic activity is going to be using a lot of ATP in that energy pathway. So how fast you can reproduce ATP is going to sort of dictate how long you can be operating at that high level of intensity. So what creatine does, like I said before, is it basically gives you another building block that allows you to sort of create ATP a little bit faster, because we do use ATP faster than we can create it. You can just run out, and sort of that's when you hit your limit. Especially, like, obviously if we didn't have a limit on this stuff, people could just sprint forever, right? we have energy systems for a reason. ATP is going to be that main fuel for that anaerobic pathway. But yeah, that's basically what creatine does. And
I guess a simple way to explain it is just you simply have some extra fuel in reserve for your muscles. If you have extra fuel, that means you can train harder. If you can train harder, you can get more adaptation. And pretty much, yeah. And then from what I remember I heard like for 5 grams of creatine, which is like a typical like little mini scoop serving, I think it would take like, you would have to consume like a kilogram of meat to get the same effect. So it just makes practical sense to supplement with it.
yeah, so like there's pros. Well, I don't really know if there's too many cons when it comes to
There's
supplements. There are some.
I quickly want to touch on the creatine thing
Yeah.
because you'll probably hear a lot of people, maybe the occasional quip like, oh, don't eat creatine, it's bad for your kidneys or whatever, da 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 da. Which there is the slightest bit of truth. However, for when it comes to creatine in general, it's probably the most researched workout supplement out there to be. And the only instances where from what I understand, I would say don't take it is perhaps if you already have a pre-existing kidney condition and you probably consulted with your medical professional. Or from what I remember, if you have a history of male pattern baldness in your family, there's like a non-correlated link with it. But from what I understand, that's like the only adverse effects or risk populations when it comes to creatine consumption.
Right, and then yeah, I guess there is another supplement that I could talk about that are not necessarily this definitely does come with a lot of cons, is your anabolic steroids.
Oh, hell yeah.
Which you will see a lot in the bodybuilding scene. Pretty much like anybody who needs to put on a lot of muscle mass fairly quickly, you've got your anabolic steroids. Now, I'm not super duper familiar with exactly the biological process of how anabolic steroids work, but like the general I guess perception of steroids is you shoot it and you get big. But essentially what anabolic steroids does is it's going to increase the rate of protein synthesis like we talked about before. So you are going to be able to build muscle faster. And it's going to decrease the rate of protein breakdown via the inhibition of cortisol. So when you put those two together, you've got just an enhanced muscle growth and recovery system going on. And that's sort of, if we want to say, the benefit of anabolic steroids. But then you also have cons, and there are a lot of cons. And depending on your competition, like, well, David, you're into bodybuilding. How, like, are steroids sort of frowned upon as a method for getting big, or is it just something that kind of is par for the course and everyone just kind of knows about it?
I would say depending on the culture and depending on where the type of gym you're at will determine what the view of steroids is. Like the gym that I go to or the gym that I was going to, I could maybe pick out maybe one or two guys. I'd look at them and I'd be like, yeah, I could see you're maybe on gear. Which, for anybody's wondering, that's a slang for steroids. But if I went to maybe like a hardcore gym, I'd probably figure out who the guy is to get steroids from. For anybody who's, I guess, maybe from the U.S. or Canada, I'm pretty sure in Canada steroids are illegal. I know in the U.S. it's 100% illegal. So in order to obtain them, you might have to risk your health to a certain extent because you probably don't know what you're getting, since you're not getting it from like a pharmacologist or something. But to answer your question, I guess it literally just depends. My own like personal idea of steroids is, if you don't intend on being like an IFBB pro professional athlete, or if it's not your career, there's probably absolutely no risk to reward benefit of taking anabolic steroids when it comes to the health and the just general monetary investment to continue getting the drugs, seeing the right specialist to make sure your health is in order, and just maintaining all the other aspects when it comes to it. Add just another layer of complication.
Yeah.
If your goal is to be a pro bodybuilder, or in some instances, it's a hot take, but I think we could probably say a lot of professional sports there are steroids involved, simply not just for performance, but also for recovery in order to increase the longevity of athletes' careers. It's only in those instances where it's just like you have the necessary resources to keep you safe, where it makes sense.
Yeah.
If you have no desire to be a professional, for it to be your career, it's probably just a little irresponsible to do it. That's morally, I don't really care if somebody does steroids or not. The only thing I care about is if they're transparent about their steroid use for the most part. Unless obviously, there's instances where you can't really say yes or no because it's illegal, but
Yeah.
that is my idea. If you're not going pro, I don't really see any reason to.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I remember when I was competing in track, I became very convinced that for the majority of my track and field career, it was basically just me and this one other guy from the district that I competed in, basically just going head to head at every meet. And I became slowly convinced, maybe it was because I was just losing, but this was my coping mechanism, but I did become very convinced that he was
on some type of gear.
Yeah. Well, just like he had all the symptoms, right? So okay, so acne is a symptom of steroid use. That being said, not everyone like you're at that age, acne is very prevalent. So I don't know. It was just a series of circumstances. I remember this very specifically. He had just come back from a hamstring injury. Which as
anybody who runs eventually probably gets
it'll happen, but it's also pretty severe, and it's going to take you at a competition for a while, and it's going to take you a while to get back to your full strength. Now, this was his first competition after this hamstring injury, and he runs a record time in the 400 meters. Now, I thought this was very suspicious, because you don't come back from a hamstring injury, which again is not, I don't think a hamstring injury has ever been a career ender for any sprinter, but it's definitely something that is going to set you back a considerable amount of time. And especially when you are coming back to competition, you are not running a meet record time, and a personal best. Also, for an event that he had never ran before, this was his first time doing the 400 meter. And as somebody who ran I ran the 100, 200, and the 400, so I had actual training in the 400, and I know certainly all this time he was not training for the 400 because he was out with a hamstring injury. There was no way he was training for a 400 meter. So he comes back and he runs a record time in the 400. I looked at all the signs, I was just like, no, that guy's on something. But maybe it's just my way of coping, of just losing to this guy. But yeah. It's all. I don't think any kind of I know for bodybuilding it's a little bit different. Obviously, it is performance enhancing drug. I just assume everybody on that stage is probably, at least on the professional stage, is probably doping to some degree. But when it comes to performance, especially in my field of athletics, when it comes to track and field, it definitely sucks when somebody is definitely on it and you have to compete against that.
Yeah, I think I like I said it before, I genuinely believe a lot of people are like, oh no, there's no steroids in professional sports, it's all cleared and stuff, but logically when you think about it, the level of money that is involved and the margins between the top athletes, anybody who is really up there, even if the athlete doesn't even know it themselves, is probably on some type of substance that is either straight borderline or simply covered up because of the status of the athlete, Yeah.
And I mean, there are exceptions. There are just really good athletes. For years, I've defended Usain Bolt as a non-doper because I do truly believe that he is just an incredible athlete in his field. But yeah, no, it is everywhere. I mean, you look at the entire Russian Olympic team, and that's state sanctioned. It's the Russian government saying, yeah, if we're going to the Olympics, everyone has to be juiced up.
If we're going, we're winning.
Yeah, and the funny part is they don't. Even when they are juiced up, they still get beaten. So, is it always worth it?
Yeah. When it comes to professional bodybuilding, it really just depends on the federation and what you consider professional.
Yeah.
When people say pro bodybuilding, they're probably talking about IFBB pro level, going to the Olympia eventually. It's pretty much a given. If you get your pro card, or even most amateurs, they'll be on type of gear because unless you're absolutely genetically gifted, you just can't compete with the level of size and mass There are a lot of natural divisions, which is what I want to compete in. And it's funny enough because you were talking about acne. So I've actually for a long time I've struggled with like body acne, especially on my back, and it's something that's only recently cleared up, like getting better with my skincare. So that was always like in the back of mind that I was always kind of like suspicious. Where I'm like, am I really? Are people gonna start doubting me that of my natural status because of this little bit of acne here and there? But I think if anybody ever accused me of steroids, I'd probably just tell them like, if I was on steroids, you know how disappointed I would be.
If you take steroids and still don't achieve maximum effect.
Literally, I'd just look at them and be like, "You think this is roids, my man? Like this, I would be absolutely upset." The only
Honestly,
way it's steroids if this happened in 3 months.
I'd be flattered if they thought I was doping. There's no way
Honestly,
there's no way I can be that good. I must be on something, which is probably
The
what I thought
biggest
of
compliment.
this guy, for sure. But I don't know. He was good, and he was good even before this event. But it was like one of like the final events of that season, and that was probably one of the last times that I saw him was when he pulled that, and it just made me super suspicious and a little bit demoralizing. But I don't know. I got through it.
Fair enough.
We're
Do we have
approaching
any more
time
supplements?
here. No, that's about all we got here.
I had one or two more I want to quickly touch on.
Sure.
I assume we're not going to hit nutrient timing today. In fact, we can probably do nutrient timing as like our grand finale of this like hopefully 3-part series. We don't want to make it 4 parts because that's getting a little ridiculous. But we can probably do nutrient timing as like our final, putting everything together. Actually, maybe putting like a solid plan on like a spreadsheet or something that like the audience could follow along with. But the last, I think maybe 1 or 2 would probably be multivitamins and mineral supplements. Very different, varying degrees of multivitamins and supplements and minerals and stuff like that. I think in general for everybody, maybe a multivitamin is probably beneficial. In the sense that a lot of us simply just don't get the required micronutrients in our regular diet. For various reasons, whether it be a discipline issue or honestly food can sometimes be just difficult to find time for, and can be expensive in some instances. So a multivitamin can maybe be like just an assurance that you're getting all your micronutrients. In regards to myself, I stopped taking it because I realized I was literally pissing my money away because my pee would be neon green, which is a pretty good indicator that you have like a excess of some type of micronutrient. So that's my little disclosure as to why I don't take them because I think I get enough of everything. But if you actually want to know if you're getting enough or not, simply just getting your blood work done and reviewing that with your like local physician is probably the best way to go about that. We talked about protein powder. Carbohydrate powder is something that a lot of people actually don't talk about, which will pop up a little bit more. Yeah, it will pop up a little bit more in nutrient timing, but I'll go over it real quick. Carb powder, it can be like Gatorade. Funny enough, I use, I don't know, Matt, do you know what Tang is?
I do.
I use Tang with essential amino acids, which I'll briefly also touch on as well as my intro workout, but essentially I use like this really fast digesting carb powder, which if you want the best, or not the best, but the most effective, getting dextrose, which is literally just straight pure glucose, is pretty effective at getting like the absolute fastest digesting carbohydrate and fuel source to your body as you can. Probably guys, in fact, probably makes more sense for actual athletes. Not to say bodybuilding is an actual sport, but guys who like are endurance athletes or team sports who are constantly burning through glycogen, getting like a Gatorade powder or a carb powder is something I wish I knew when I competed. Because I think just across the board, any athlete, even just regular person, like some type of carb powder while you're doing your sport or activity is probably pretty helpful and usually has no harm. So getting that would probably be something I'd recommend. I touched on EAAs real quick. So essential amino acids in powdered form is something to look into. The difference between that and probably what you've heard as branched chain amino acids, BCAAs, is simply that the EAAs often a little bit more expensive, but they're actually those 9 essential amino acids that are found in animal products and that the body can't build for itself. While branched chain amino acids can contain any of those 22 amino acids. To say one is more effective than the other one, not a lot of research to suggest that, but I would put my money on in the next couple of years or next honestly, maybe even right now, saying that EAAs are probably a much better investment than getting branched chain amino acids, simply because those EAAs are exactly the protein, like the amino acids that your body can't get anywhere else but being consumed. So
Now,
that's something to look into.
are branched chain amino acids not included in EAA supplements? Because branched chain amino acids are essential amino acids.
They are, but they
three
don't
of the 9.
necessarily have to include. Yeah, that's the thing. They don't have to include all of them. But if you
Right.
get an EAA powder, you're 100%, not 100%, but you're more certain to contain more of those essential amino acids. I would say the EAAs should probably get more of a effect, a very tiny, minute effect, but you probably it's actually worth the investment to begin with. All of that, of course, withstands if you're not getting adequate protein from whole food sources or protein powder. That's definitely a priority to address before you start supplementing. As Matt said earlier, these are things on top of an already good structured diet. It's not going to make up for any inadequacies.
Yeah.
And I spoke about omega-3 fat supplements. I don't really want to talk too much into detail because I'm not the biggest expert on them. But getting an omega-3 might be something to look into. But that probably for the audience is something to research for themselves.
For sure. All right. Well, we've come to the end of our incredible podcast here. So yeah, like I said at the beginning, if you're just tuning in now, you can find it obviously on this channel. If you're watching now, you already know where to find it. If you scroll down a little bit, you'll see the YouTube link. That is our Fitness Decoded YouTube channel, and it's cause to celebrate because now we are the first Fitness Decoded that comes up when you type in Fitness Decoded to YouTube. So that's a win. We are the best. I mean, there's only 2. The other one is like a channel with I think 1 video and no subscribers, and that video only has like 10 views. So I think
we win.
Okay. Yeah, we win. We are the bigger.
We win. We are the biggest, bigger Fitness Decoded.
Yes, we are the best. So yeah, if you are looking for the Fitness Decoded YouTube channel, where you can find not only the whole uploaded podcast, but what we're going to start doing is uploading little tiny 10-minute sort of bite-sized info pieces that kind of encapsulate kind of each topic that we talked about in these last little chunks. What I might even, because I know you can also timestamp in the video as well. So if you are just planning on watching the full thing, or if you don't want to click on multiple videos, you can just click through the main big upload and just click whatever topic. So I'm gonna have to play around with that. That's probably gonna come tomorrow. I'll upload the whole thing tonight, and then I'll do the little bits tomorrow. So we got that going on. If you want to follow any of David's stuff, that's Castro Fitness. Wait, is it right? Yeah, it's Castro Fitness.
It's just Castro Fitness.
Like the thing keeps popping up on the socials, so that's Castro Fitness with a 0. You can also check them out at www.castrofitness.com if you're interested in what I do, which honestly these days is not a whole lot. That's Matt_Jones6 on Instagram, or just follow me on Twitch. I do obviously other things on Twitch other than this. But yeah, that's pretty much all we got going on for now. Again, if you're a YouTube listener, feel free to subscribe, drop a comment down below. Make sure that bell is on. You will be notified, although we are on a schedule. So again, it's every other Wednesday, so you can either expect the whole video to be up on Wednesday night, or at the very worst on a Thursday. But yeah, and then Twitch, you're already here, so you know what's up. Oh yeah, and then full audio is going to be uploaded on SoundCloud. I need to make a SoundCloud account though, as well as a Twitter account. I do need to work on the branding a little bit, so maybe I'll spend tomorrow doing that, because I do have a lot of free time tomorrow. But yeah, if you've enjoyed, follow, like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. Until then, we'll catch you in the next one.